All right, welcome to day 3. I hope everybody is doing well and trying to keep up with their self-care routines, managing all of the things that life has thrown at us as we continue to move through the week, and everybody is staying as healthy as they possibly can be. I am encouraged by all of the observations that I've done, and I look forward to continuing to do observation number 2 with everybody as we move forward. And I hope you're getting a decent experience out of this immersion week. I really hope. So today in today, day 3, we are covering counseling theories. And as I mentioned before, I'm not expecting you to be an expert on every single one of the counseling theories that we're covering today, okay? I just want this to be basically an introduction to what's out there, the theoretical approaches that are out there. Now, with the first part 1 of the counseling theories lecture and PowerPoint, these are probably the theories and the theorists and counselors, not counselors, like therapists, because back in the day they weren't called counselors. These are the therapists that you're probably most familiar with when you think about psychotherapy, counseling, and the foundations of counseling. And it is not that we don't use these theoretical approaches anymore, but it's important to know that there are different ways of implementing some of these older approaches in 2020, okay? Again, I keep saying that I'm going to get more into this in 606, and so hopefully you do have me in 606, so I'm not lying to you, but I didn't want to provide you with all the information and all the videos and all the examples of what this looks like in today's age now, whenever you're just going to be repeating that later. But do know that these approaches, although they have been around for a long, long time, there has been an acknowledgement from the folks that still run the societies around these and that still actively practice things like psychoanalysis and and behavioral therapy, that yeah, we needed to modernize how they were implemented, how we were actually using them. Because if you are practicing psychoanalysis historically, you're having a client on your caseload for like forever. Just like 10 years, like a decade, basically. And so with managed care and the need for us to speed up the process of psychotherapy, that's not practical anymore. And so there have been adjustments. So in this first set of slides, I'm just going to kind of quickly go through some of the key concepts, the key players. I structured this in a way that I hope it will be beneficial for you. 1, for the exam. I mean, some of the information and content for the exam I'll take from these slides, okay? And 2, for exams that you're going to take after graduation. And so both with the CRC and the NCE, this, of course, is going to be a focus. And you'll get some more of this content in other classes as well. But knowing, what key concepts, the key terms, key terminology, the people that kind of founded these theoretical approaches, that's going to be important for you to know later. So I hate that I'm kind of like teaching to the test in this lecture series, but I would prefer to do that rather than not provide anything and just let you go out and search on your own. So let's get started. So when we're talking about major counseling theories, they're kind of these major schools of thought, okay? And there's lots of different terminology that's used in the counseling profession, lots of acronyms, as you will soon find, and I'll be talking about all of those, but there are these schools of thought within counseling, those being psychodynamic, behavioral, person-centered, or cognitive, the 4 major schools of thought, and original schools of thought as well. I always do like to say that the consistent thing with all of these are that they were founded by white men and normed on kind of the middle class population. And so one of the things that we've seen in the postmodern era and the adjustments to these schools of thought is that they have addressed the absence of culture within the original development of these approaches, okay? Because there truly was, and historically there has been an absence of culture throughout most of the counseling theories that we use and practice with now, but there has been an acknowledgement that that is not something that we can continue to do. We can't ignore that aspect. Culture and social justice type issues as well. So when we're thinking about psychodynamic approaches, again, if you have taken a Psych 101 class at any point in your life, these names are going to be familiar to you, right? Sigmund Freud, Alfred Adler, Carl Jung, all came from the same type of school of thought originally. In fact, Adler and Jung were students of Freud and just decided to break away and do other things at later points. I mean, this theory, psychodynamic theory, I mean, Sigmund Freud is kind of the father of psychotherapy, right? And as he should be, because he fathered all of it, right? He thought he broke away from the medical community and started focusing on the mind and the unconscious. But Adler, in fact, you'll learn about him in the family counseling class, a couples and family counseling class. He has done a lot of work and it's focused on families, of course, and we see like the birth order hypotheses and Adler's approach. But we're talking late 1800s, early 1900s with psychodynamic school of thought. Okay, that's whenever it was really founded and started to become, there was kind of a boom in psychoanalysis during that period of time. So with the key points that I want you to remember, not only the names of each of the people that have develop these schools of thought or theoretical approaches, but also kind of these key the key points around what a counselor's role is if they're practicing from this theoretical orientation. So with psychodynamic theories, the counselor is the expert. You know, this is where you're picturing somebody in a white coat and kind of that typical, you go sit on the couch. The purpose of counseling is to strengthen the ego, right? So we have the id, ego, and superego within psychodynamic, right? And that's, again, things that you're probably pretty familiar with if you've had a counseling 101 class or psychology 101 class, right? The id being kind of those natural instincts, our desires, our drives that are innate to us. Superego being, you know, our morality, you know, we should be doing things based on our morals and our conscious, right? And then the ego kind of mediating between the two. And so the purpose of Freud's theory around personality is that each of these parts of a personality develop at different stages, and you know, because of that, you know, our behaviors are based on whatever stage of life that we might be in, or in our human psyche as a whole. So the counselor in psychodynamic is the expert, okay? And basically the client would be kind of sitting back and letting the therapist direct where everything was going. And so of course there, you know, is the focus on defense mechanisms, different stages of development, and this is where we hear about people getting stuck at a stage, right, or fixated at a stage. And the techniques that are used are that free association, dream analysis, and interpretation. Interpretation being where the counselor, the therapist is saying, you know, based on this stuff that you've told me, this is what I think is happening with you, and this is what I think, you know, you should be working on. This is how I think the process should be going. Again, that's kind of how historically individuals have practiced psychoanalysis. We've seen again a bit of a shift in that current day psychotherapists, people that practice psychoanalysis, are sitting back a bit. I'll say that, or they're sitting back a bit, letting clients direct the process of therapy more than they were in the early 1900s. Okay, so moving through into behavioral therapy and person-centered therapy kind of emerged around the same time. So the key players with behavioral therapy are Skinner, Bandura, Pavlov. I'm sure you've all heard of Pavlov and his dogs and salivating dogs. And the core concept here is that behavior is based on learning. We're not talking about the unconscious mind. We're not talking about stages in personality development. We're talking about behavior. Behavior is concrete. It can be modified. It can be changed. And if we change the behavior, then we change the outcomes. And feelings have nothing to do with any of it, right? This is more of a scientific process. Again, you're going to get people that are in white coats, right? The counselor, again, is the expert in this. The counselor is directing what behaviors, to a degree, should be changed, but more so how to change those behaviors. the counselor is identifying, reinforcements, reward systems, performing functional analyses. So that's the scientific aspect of it. So really charting behavior change. Techniques are going to include things that actually we are using today still. All right. So if we're thinking about EMDR, the eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, that we've seen, becoming more popular, I would say, in the way that we're implementing behavioral therapy techniques today. Biofeedback, there is something obviously to be said about how we can see on computer screens nowadays how our thought processes actually map out, and reward systems, of course, are still frequently used. Now we see behavioral therapy applied in terms of special populations, individuals that work with people with autism in school systems. I mean, there's applied behavioral analysis, which is worldwide spread at this point, additional degrees in that and everything. So behavioral theories, behavioral analysis is still used today and accepted as an evidence-based practice, as it should be. But again, this is an area where the counselor is viewed as the expert in the situation. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum here with person-centered theory, okay, and Carl Rogers. This was the first time when the counseling profession, or what the roots of the counseling profession, saw a massive shift in how we view other people. And with Carl Rogers, his approach was so dramatically different than any of the other therapists that had come before him, that it really was a major shift in our mindset. Interestingly enough, it kind of came in a time period when it probably should have come, right? And so we're talking about the 50s and 60s here, right? Whenever Carl Rogers really started to gain some traction in his approach to therapy. There's a video that you're going to be watching about that will show an example of Carl Rogers working with a client. I have said, and I've said to some of you, and I've said to past students, person-centered approaches and the intent of person-centered therapy is for the client to feel that they are co-constructing the process of therapy. If you're thinking, I'm a very visual person, so person-centered is, instead of like psychoanalysis with the counselor sitting on a chair analyzing dreams of a client that's farther away. Person-centered, you're like holding the hand of your client and you're walking down the same path together, step by step, movement by movement. You as the counselor are not directing the client. You are not directing the session. The client is in charge, right? And the counselor meets the client where they might be. And so there's not any kind of emphasis on the past. There's not, there's a reflection of the present and the reflection of what the client is saying to you in that moment. You'll see that even his nonverbals, he sits right there in front of the client. Definitely would not be allowed this week to be, Carl Rogers would not be allowed to sit that close to a client today. But there's not a great deal of questioning. Even he's perfected the art of reflection, of feelings, reflection of meaning, and kind of the big three things to remember are that he's that within person-centered theories, you're in congruence with your client. You're right there with them as they walk their life's path, right? You're showing them unconditional positive regard, not judgmental at all in any way, not by the tone of voice, not by your facial expressions, not by your body posture, not by the verbal language that you're using. And through all of that, you're showing empathic understanding. You're showing a great deal of empathy towards your clients. Techniques, again, include paraphrasing, reflection of feeling and meaning, checking in to make sure you're ensuring understanding. And the techniques with person-centered are why I say it's a brilliant place for new counselors to start, because this is really, once you get the hang of paraphrasing or reflecting feeling to a deeper level meaning, and checking back in with your clients to make sure that you're understanding what they're saying in the right way, then once that all becomes natural, everything else becomes a little bit easier. So I hope you enjoy the video of Carl Rogers. I I like once we get into the Carl Rogers area because we can actually see film of people. Like we can actually see Carl Rogers and people like Albert Ellis and Aaron Beck talking and giving lectures and working with clients. And so you'll see a lot of that again in 606. I don't want to spoil it for you right now. Okay, so moving on to cognitive theories, okay? And so again, we're talking Albert Ellis, Aaron Beck are kind of the two big key players here. If you've had an intro to psychology class, you've probably heard of Albert Ellis, maybe not directly his name, but REBT, rational emotive behavioral therapy, and the ABC theory, that we have these negative events that serve as the A, we have beliefs, which is B, and then the emotions that come afterwards is C. So what we want to see is any kind of event happening, our belief, kind of the B part being a rational belief rather than irrational, right? So clients come to us, kind of the approach here with ABCs is that clients come to us having had something happen, they have formed a belief about that event, it's an irrational belief, and because of that they have an unhealthy or negative emotion or reaction to whatever the event was. And so our job as counselors is to come in and help shift how that belief was developed. So the event is what it is, and it always will be. We can't change events that happen, but we can change and modify how our belief systems are formed from that event. And then the outcome of that, the outcome of that would be kind of these healthy emotions that come as a result of changing our irrational belief patterns, our thought patterns. So key concepts, we have these dysfunctional cognitions that result in maladaptive behaviors. Techniques that we see here are different than the ones that came before cognitive theories. So we're seeing homework come into play. We are assigning our clients tasks that they can then work on outside of the counseling room, right? Actively work on. So we're taking therapy outside of the counseling office, testing hypotheses out, trying things out. So the counselor might say, it sounds to me like, a way to change this. Oh, now I can't even think now. My coffee has not set in, but but you're testing out hypotheses with the client. And so if you have an idea of why something might be occurring, you're putting that out to your client saying, hey, is this right? Is my thought right on this? We're seeing techniques like thought stopping, where you're teaching your clients how to recognize when those irrational beliefs, those thought patterns comes up, and then doing things like snapping a rubber band on your wrist. We see this in cognitive behavioral therapy too. There's sometimes confusion between what's the difference between cognitive therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy, kind of two sides of the same coin. CBT, we're focusing a little bit more on behavior versus just straight cognitive therapy, okay? For the observation activity that you guys are going to be doing before you roll into the second part of day 3 lecture, what you're going to be doing is viewing 2 different videos. So there's something called disability affirmative therapy. It's not, I don't know that it would technically be considered an evidence-based practice, okay, but I think it does kind of fit into some of the multiculturally focused theories that you're going to learn about in the second part of the lecture today. But there are examples of disability affirmative therapy videos that I hope work. They worked for me when I tried them out. And so I want you to see the difference, right, between one counselor's approach to working with somebody with a disability versus another counselor's approach to working with somebody with a disability. Why am I focusing on disability? Well, again, because it's a rehab counseling program, and not only that, but individuals with disabilities are widely underserved in mental health, in the mental health field. Part of it has to do with access, part of it has to do with of course, cost. Sometimes interpreters are needed. They're, just again being able to access counseling. But so I wanted to show you some examples of counselors who are working with people with disabilities, and then I want you to compare them, right? So I want you to compare both the video with Alette and the video with Heidi, and then get back on the discussion board and talk about it a little bit before we get into the second part of day 3. And with that, I will leave you to it, and I'll see you back for the Counseling Theories Part 2 lecture.